Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. This week, special guests Laura Anderson, founder of Local Ocean, and Peter Curler, her financial consultant, explain why Laura decided to sell her thriving seafood business in a transaction that created a business model that is neither widely known nor widely understood. It's called an employee ownership trust, and there are only about 50 of them in the United States. But their numbers are growing here and abroad, and for good reason. The trust model offers owners something of a choose-your-own-adventure option that can allow them to sell for a market rate in a relatively uncomplicated transaction that makes it far more likely the business will remain true to its established mission, especially when compared to selling to private equity or even to an employee stock ownership plan. Of course, there are challenges, including getting a bank to consider financing one of these deals. But in this episode, Laura explains why, with Peter's help, she decided to trust the trust. Even in good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations will let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. Same thing with our daily newsletter, the 21 Hats Morning Report, which Inc. magazine named the best newsletter for business owners and which you can subscribe to for free at 21hats.com, where you can also find transcripts of our podcast episodes and lots of other articles and interviews. Joining me this week on the podcast are Laura Anderson, founder of Local Ocean, a restaurant and fish market in Newport, Oregon, and Peter Curler, founder of Lumo Group, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and advises mission-driven businesses. The episode is titled, A Successful Owner Chooses an Innovative Exit. Before we get started, I want to tell you about an upcoming event that you should know about. It's the Great Game of Business Conference. This year's theme is Navigating an Uncertain Future. As always, the conference will focus on engaging and educating your staff to build a company culture where employees feel valued and where owners don't have to solve every problem. Going back more than 15 years, I've been to this conference more times than I can remember, and I've seen some great speakers, great presentations, great discussions. I've even led a few of them. But here's the thing. That's not why I love this conference. I love it because it attracts an amazing array of entrepreneurs and business owners. I've made countless friends and I've learned so much from the willingness of great game businesses to share their journeys, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you decide to go, I'm confident that you will know you are in the right place with the right people. This year's conference is in Arlington, Texas. It runs from September 10th to 12th. You can get more information at greatgame.com. But if you do sign up, be sure to use the code 21HATS, that's the number 21 HATS, run together, which will get you $150 off the list price. And now, on to today's show. Welcome, Laura and Peter. It's great to have you both here. As I think you know, we've been talking a lot on this podcast about ownership models and business transitions and succession plans, which is why I was really eager to speak with both of you. To start, Laura, maybe you can give us a little background on Local Ocean Seafoods. How'd you come to start the business?
Thanks, Lauren. Local Ocean is mostly a seafood restaurant located on the Oregon coast in Newport, Oregon. I came from a commercial fishing family, and I've always been really deeply connected and close to the fishing industry. We started the company about 20 years ago. I started it with another commercial fisherman, actually, who had a little more business acumen and also a lot more collateral than I did at the time, both of which were very handy for starting a new business. I did buy out that business partner after about the first 8 years. So I was sole owner for quite a while until we did the employee ownership transition. But really our special sauce is that we are located right across the street from one of the most dynamic and diverse fishing fleets on the West Coast. So our ability to access that seafood product directly from boats and be able to serve that product up same day often in our restaurant was really something that was critical for our brand and was ultimately, I think, the kind of North Star for our success over the last 20 years.
Is the restaurant that exists today pretty similar to the one you opened 20 years ago, or did it evolve?
Yes and no. Interestingly, the menu there are a lot of mainstays on the menu that are just so popular that we still offer them. But the size of the restaurant has definitely changed. When we started, we had a fish market and only about 8 tables as people were lining up for our cups of roasted garlic and Dungeness crab soup and our perfectly grilled tuna mignons and our fishwife stew. We quickly realized we needed more tables, so we just started stuffing tables wherever we could and had outdoor seating. At one point, we had like 3-hour waits in the summertime. So
Wow.
at that point, I bought the building and we had an upstairs to the building and we expanded and doubled our capacity, which is about what I would consider a right size for us. We still do run weights in the summer, even with our expanded capacity, but it's a manageable operation that I think we're really comfortable with now.
I think you said it's started primarily a restaurant business, but you eventually started doing other stuff as well?
Well, we always had the fish market. Part of our mission was to be a showcase for the local seafood species that we harvest here off the Oregon coast. So the fish market really allows that to happen. We've stayed pretty true to restaurant and fish market. During the pandemic, we did pivot into a really successful meal kit called DocBox that we were sending our signature seafood dishes in meal kit, think like HelloFresh kind of form, across the state. And that was really cool. As the world kind of went back to its normal patterns, we've wound that program down to just kind of a special occasion offer. So we still stay fairly focused on restaurant and fish market.
And when did you start thinking about some sort of business transition or succession? What prompted that?
Well, oddly enough, I think I started thinking about it when we were starting the business back in 2002.
Interesting.
I always had a hunch that employee ownership, there was something there that would be meaningful. I know it made sense to me. I thought, wow, if I was an employee and I felt like I was an owner of this business, I might behave differently. And so at that point in 2002, I started collecting some information on ESOPs, employee stock ownership programs or plans. I think I went to a seminar or two and talked to some different business owners that were using ESOPs. But when you're growing a business, doing something really complicated, well, it seemed really complicated to me at the time, like an ESOP just took a back burner. So it wasn't until probably 2020, kind of the seminal year for many of us, that I really said it's time to look at what the exit strategies are. And lo and behold, there were some new options there that were really compelling and exciting for me.
How did you find out about those new options?
Well, I started with just a Google search, like many of us do, and stumbled across some websites that led me to a group called Project Equity, which is based out of California. And I reached out to Project Equity, and they got right back to me. They're a nonprofit that is really vested in promoting employee ownership across the nation. They offered a feasibility study package, if you will, that seemed to be a really good first step in looking at what the modern current options are for employee ownership, and helped me to deduce what the best fit for Local Ocean Seafoods might be.
How did you end up running into Peter?
Well, after going through that process with Project Equity, we looked at ESOPs, we looked at worker-owned cooperatives, and we also looked at the I hear it referred to as different things: employee ownership trust, perpetual purpose trust, stewardship trust, but the trust ownership model in its different incarnations. One of the things that I really liked about the trust model for ownership, more so than the other two options, was that, well, compared to ESOP, I really liked that it was a kind of more of a real-time benefit for employees. ESOPs are more of a retirement benefit for employees. And when I thought about the demographic of our workforce being largely young people and a lot of immigrant labor, I thought, wow, we're going to be challenged to incentivize people with a retirement plan when they're coming to work what they think is maybe just a summer job. I mean, interestingly, a lot of those summer jobs turn into 8-10-year employees, but they don't know that at the time that they start, that they're, going to build a career with us. Worker-owned cooperative model was definitely more kind of bench tested in the country, and there's a lot more options to look at out there in terms of case studies. But the one thing I didn't really love about the co-op model is that an employee has to opt in, meaning they have to sign up and even put in a nominal contribution. It doesn't have to be much. It can be $25, which doesn't seem like a barrier for most of us. But in fact, I was a little concerned. I have a hard time getting employees just to pay $3 for a phone app so they can manage their schedule. We have to subsidize that for them. You're working with a lot of young people and also people who just, like I said, they don't know if they're going to be there very long. What I loved about the trust ownership model is that nobody has to opt in. Everybody's included once they meet your predetermined benchmark for what that kind of vesting level is. And you just had a lot more flexibility in terms of kind of the management structure and the governance structure. So Project Equity really specialized in co-ops, and they didn't have a lot of experience with trusts. And lo and behold, we had that experience right here in my home state of Oregon. Peter was working with a company at that time that was specializing in this new form of ownership.
Peter, tell us, how did you come to specialize in this area?
Yeah, so I was working in the food world in Oregon. I was working at a startup grocery store here that was like a healthy convenience store hybrid. And when I was working there, I was in charge of kind of the capital raising piece of the puzzle. I had come from a political fundraising background and kind of parlayed that into capital raising at the startup level. And then after that, I kind of went out on my own to help other mission-driven companies think about how to capitalize their companies for growth. At this point, I wasn't doing succession planning or anything like that. It was all about just helping mission-driven companies find aligned capital. And as I was doing this as a consultant, I got approached by Organically Grown Company, which is the largest independent organic produce distributor in the country. And they're right here in Oregon. And they were planning to do this pioneering new form of ownership, which was a perpetual purpose trust transition. And this was 2017. And so they, to facilitate that transition, needed to bring in capital to buy out the outgoing owners. Which included both an ESOP as well as a bunch of human owners. So they brought me on board. I helped them raise money from aligned investors so that they could make this transition possible. And right after that transition happened, they were then the largest purpose trust owned company in the United States, or if not the largest, one of the largest.
How many do you think there were at that point?
There were very few. There was a handful, maybe a dozen, but most of them were small and unknown. Now there are only 50 in the United States. There's a lot more in Europe, but it's newer in the United States. And people like Laura they truly are pioneers because there's only 50 businesses that have done this, that have made this transition to a purpose trust or an employee ownership trust. But it's growing rapidly. And so after Organically Grown did this transition, we started getting calls from peer companies all over because Organically Grown is kind of a hub. They work with farmers, they work with sellers, retailers, and they're this hub in the middle of this organic industry. And if you think about the organic industry, the dawn of the organic movement, quote unquote, of course, it goes back to centuries, but the dawn of the new organic movement is like the late 70s, early 80s. And there's all these idealistic young founders in their 20s or early 30s at that time who 40 years later in 2018, 2019 are at retirement age. And they want a way to transition their business without compromising the integrity or the purpose or the values or the way they treat their employees. And so when OGC, Organically Grown, did this transition, we started getting calls and said, hey, can you help us do something similar? So sensing an opportunity both to help and to diversify OGC's revenue a little bit, we started an in-house consultancy called Alternative Ownership Advisors, which Laura alluded to before. So at AOA, Alternative Ownership Advisors, for the next 4 years, we helped companies like Local explore these transitions and execute these transitions. And then ultimately, having a consultancy housed inside of a produce distributor just no longer made sense. Organically Grown Company was a fantastic incubator for that, but we decided to move it outside of the confines of the produce distribution business and continue the work elsewhere. So my colleague, partner, Natalie Reitman-White and I, we spun off and we both started our own businesses. So she started Purpose Owned, I started Lumo Group, and we both work on these trust ownership transitions, and we continue to collaborate, on a lot of the deals that we do, to this day.
Do you specialize in trusts, or do you do other alternative forms as well?
We help people explore, and we try to do it in a neutral way. Like look at ESOPs, look at co-ops, look at trusts, even just look at traditional employee buy-in programs. Something like where they just buy in over time, like the law firm model. But ultimately, if they want to actually move forward and implement and execute, that's the only thing that I focus on. The only thing that Natalie focuses on is going to be the trust structure. There's other service providers like Project Equity who are great at other things like co-ops or ESOPs, but we focus on trusts.
So, Laura, when you connected with Peter and you started to learn more about trusts, did it appeal to you right away, or was it more of an acquired taste?
Well, honestly, it appealed to me right away, but I didn't really get it for quite a while. I was having a hard time wrapping my head around what this meant, that what is a trust? How does it actually own a company? It's a piece of paper. Like, what does that mean? Coming from the business world of individual ownership, I had a very strong sense of what I thought ownership meant. And this was really changing the whole nature of that. So it took me a while, but once it clicked for me and once I got it, I was like, wow, this is really game changing. I was all in when we went into it. And I'm still all in. I think it's an incredible model for ownership for the future.
So maybe at this point, I think the time has come to explain what an employee ownership trust is. Peter, why don't you do that? And then Laura, maybe you could, after that, explain what it was that it took a while to sink in and what became meaningful to you once you understood it. So Peter, first with what is an employee ownership trust?
Sure. So like Laura mentioned, there's a few different terms people use. So I'm going to zoom out and I'll start with the term perpetual purpose trust. And then we'll zoom in a little bit on employee ownership trusts. So a perpetual purpose trust ownership, or what often just people call trust ownership or steward ownership, the thing that it does is it makes it possible for business owners like Laura to sell or transition the ownership of their company in a way that maintains the company's purpose and values and perpetuates its independence. So that's what it does. Now let's get specific. Let's take the phrase perpetual purpose trust and focus on two keywords, perpetual and purpose. So perpetual, this is important because what you're doing is you're replacing a mortal human owner with an immortal perpetual owner. And this immortal perpetual owner, the trust, never wants to sell the company. It never wants to take a dividend. It never wants to extract value. It just wants to hold this entity and make sure that it's governed to purpose. And of course, it has to make a profit. It has to survive as a business. But the trust is interested in the purpose as well. So that's the perpetual part.
I think to the extent people are familiar with this concept, if they've heard of one, they've probably heard of Patagonia, and they know that Yvon Chouinard did this. And the purpose in that case, I believe all of the profits of Patagonia going forward goes to a foundation. That's the purpose. And obviously it's climate related.
The purpose it could strictly be to benefit, the employees who work for the company. In Local Ocean case, I'll let Laura share her purpose statement, which has to do with, I think, both sustainable seafood and employees, if my recollection is correct. But you don't need to have some fancy structure like Patagonia's. In many ways, Patagonia is the exception, not the rule when it comes to trust ownership. Most of the businesses making this transition are not, big, well-known businesses. They're small or medium-sized businesses like Local Ocean. Many of them are family businesses who maybe don't have heirs who want to take it over, but they all share this desire to perpetuate something bigger and more meaningful than just maximizing profit for the sake of it. But I think it would be helpful maybe to dive into the specific Local Ocean example of how they set up their trust.
Maybe you can start, Laura, by telling us what was it that you struggled with? What was it that it took you a while to get about the trust platform?
I think it was just kind of like Peter said, it's this non-mortal owner. It's this piece of paper. And so that was kind of just a little bit nebulous as we were working through this with our transition team. So, essentially what happened with AOA, with Peter, Natalie, and their other partners at that time was they brought myself, and I think there were 5 of us from our leadership team at Local Ocean together for weekly meetings over a fairly robust period of time. I think it was really about 6 months of what I would call intense meetings, and then maybe another 3 months just to kind of fill out those details. Some of the first things that we had to do was, as a team, really define that purpose. And we don't have a single purpose statement. The company has a mission statement that's a single statement, but the company is not necessarily the trust. The company is still a corporation. So what was Laura Anderson, previously Laura Anderson and my business partner, we owned an S Corp. Many of us are familiar with that. The tax liability flows back to the owners through a K-1. When I bought out my business partner, we had 1,000 shares of stock. I bought 500 shares of stock from him, and I paid that on a personal note over a 7-year period. All of that debt was paid off before we started this process. So really what we had to do was define this new owner in terms of purpose. And we actually have 12 purpose statements that range from purposes around people, particularly our employees and how they benefit from the company, purpose statements around our product and really ensuring that we continually and always buy the majority of our seafood direct from our local fishing fleet through these relationships and through these fair purchasing practices, which, as I said to you, that's really the hallmark of our brand, and it's how we've been successful. So ensuring that we do that in perpetuity was very important to me. We do have purpose around planet and philanthropy and advocacy and supporting values-aligned partners through donations. But as Peter said, we have to have a profit. So we actually have 12 purposes. And then we had to really get to a governance model that would define a group of people that would be there to annually review what the company's results are to those purposes. So just this last year, myself and the CEO of the company put together our first results to purpose report, where we have metrics for every one of these 12 objectives, and we can measure how we're doing relative to that. And we turn this over to what's called the Trust Stewardship Committee. That's written into the trust agreement that we have a body of people that reviews the results to purpose and says definitively every year, are you doing what you said you were going to do? And if you're deviating from what you said you were going to do, then we need to remediate that. So if, for example, we were selling a product that was not aligned with our values, in our case, farm salmon would not align with our values of wild and local, then that Trust Stewardship Committee would need to take action with the CEO, who's ultimately responsible for those purchasing decisions. So that kind of put in place an oversight committee. They have a very limited role. It's just that. That's all they do. They don't run the company. They don't make the purchasing decisions. They just make sure that things are going according to plan. So once that purpose and that committee was established, that goes into the trust agreement. All those shares that I talked about got boiled down to a single share. Local Ocean is now a single share corporation. And the reason for that is that it's indivisible. Local Ocean can't say, we want to sell 50% of our company to another seafood company. That would be outside of the rules. We could, in fact, merge with another employee-owned trust or stewardship trust, which is within the rules. So Organically Grown Company, for example, and Local Ocean could merge, but only in as much as they're both of the same structures. Those were some of the kind of nitty-gritty legal logistical details that got worked out over this 6-month period. But it was incredibly valuable in terms of really defining the brand and making sure that we're set up for success. So the trust has its oversight committee, but the company is still a company. It's now a C Corp. We had to make that transition because there's no mortal entity to take the tax liability. So that was pretty simple. And the C Corp is run by a board of directors, which is primarily all of those accountabilities flow to the CEO of the company. So as a founder, I am on that board of directors and I have a seat in perpetuity as long as I want it. If at some point down the road I decide that, you know what, I'm kind of ready to really move on and exit the company, I can leave that seat behind, but they can't get rid of me until I'm ready. So that's kind of cool. It allowed me to retain some oversight, which is important to me. We'll probably talk a little bit about how the buyout was financed and some of the other relationships that I still have with the company. But suffice it to say, one of the beauties of the trust model is that there is a lot of flexibility for every founder, owner, and entity to define the system that works best for them. And Peter and his partners were really great about bringing case studies to us so that we could learn about how other companies were approaching governance. And I think we landed on a structure that works well for our company.
And now Local Ocean is the case study we bring to new clients.
I do want to talk about how you financed it, Laura. But first, did this deal close in 2020 or when did it close?
We closed the trust in June of 2022.
Oh, okay. And give us a sense of how big the company was at that point in terms of revenue, employees.
Yeah, we had reached a point where we were kind of maintaining a $6 to $7 million sales, sales top line, and we have about 80 employees when we're in our peak season. We maintain about 70 employees year round for the slow season.
And you needed to get some money out of this as the owner of the business. How did you arrange that?
Yeah, so I think the financing part of it is still something that's a little bit nascent in the country, probably as a whole. As a business owner, I was very experienced in signing a lot of bank documents and doing a lot of personal guarantees for every single loan I took out. When I bought my business partner's shares, when I bought the building, when we did a major remodel on the building, I always had to sign a personal guarantee, which basically said, if I fail on this, you can pretty much take me personally to the end of it. The employees don't have that risk. They are not true owners in the sense that Peter mentioned. The trust is, and the trust has nothing. The trust, in fact, doesn't even have a bank account at this point. We had a bank account for a brief period of time to distribute that single share of stock, but the trust has no interest in amassing any kind of wealth, and it doesn't need it for anything. So the traditional banking sector has a really hard time with this. There's nobody to hold accountable in the event of a business failure. We had a couple of options to consider. One was looking for impact investors that are willing to go out on a limb and take risk for supporting social impact ventures. And also, as the outgoing owner, I could hold a personal note for the company that could be paid over time. We were, I think, lucky. I think it was a best case scenario for me. We were able to find an impact investor that financed about half of the buyout, and I took a personal note on the other half of the buyout. But we were refused by our first overture for banking. And as Peter was there through that whole process, trying to nurture that relationship and really make that deal happen, it took several months of just a lot of grunt work and paperwork and handing over documents to ultimately find that they weren't willing to do it. So Peter and I both are of the mind that we have a long way to go in terms of getting more banking options, especially for owners that maybe aren't willing to or able to carry a personal note. But right now, those are kind of the main financing options.
What does the impact investor get in return for providing half of the financing?
It's a market rate loan. They have an interest rate commensurate with market rates. So they are acting, as a normal bank would with normal bank interests. It's just they're taking a larger risk. If the company fails before the end of the loan, there's nothing to back that up except for the collateral of the business, which would probably not cover the loan. And one of the other, challenges is just I was always used to having a line of credit for the business, which sometimes we would tap into during the slow season just to get through, the winter months. And we have a very cyclical tourist economy. And that just wasn't available through my normal bank. They are a small community bank, and they just are not in a position to go out on a limb unless there's somebody to sign or put up collateral for a line of credit. So that means that we have to be a lot more prudent in our reserves and be more self-sufficient, and there's risk to that.
You sold 100% of the business. You got paid for half of it from the impact investor. You took a note for the other half. How do you feel you did in terms of that price compared to what you could have gotten had you decided to sell the business on the market?
I felt good about it. I felt like the third party business valuation that we did contract for was a fair assessment. And that was the number that we used for the sales price. And I think that was required by the impact investor. They did want that third party independent assessment. So I did feel good about it. There were other options available to me through the trust ownership, which was a partial sale or sell over time. I went with a one and done. I personally felt we would be more successful with just going all the way through with 100% sale of that stock rather than parsing it out over time. But that is also an option for businesses, particularly if the financing piece necessitates that.
And I just want to underline the point here is that this is not charity. And most businesses, most clients that we work with, they do realize a fair market value on their sale of their business to the trust. Now, how that is financed really varies, but the value they're getting is typically going to be a fair market value. Now, there are exceptions to that. Most famously, it's going to be Patagonia's exception, where you had an already wealthy founder who was willing to basically gift the business, but that's not the situation most people are in.
Sure. My guess is that you end up talking, Peter, to businesses who are intrigued by this idea, who might get a little wary about once they start hearing about the financing aspect of it, the fact that banks are not on board with this concept yet. Not every business, I imagine, is going to be able to find an impact investor who's willing to do what Laura's did. How do you deal with that? What do you tell businesses who are concerned?
So the flexibility of the outgoing owner, outgoing shareholders is very important. So if you're looking for a big liquidity event upfront, say 100% buyout or something close to that, then there's a good chance this structure won't work for you unless you're an exceptional business, because a bank's not going to finance 100% and a seller note won't give you the upfront liquidity. So you'll, by definition, have to bring in an equity partner. And you're right, it is hard to find good equity partners for these sorts of things unless you're an exceptional business. And so many businesses just aren't, either they're not investable in that sense, like they're not going to be able to attract that sort of capital, or they maybe just aren't willing to put up the work that it would require to raise that money. But that said, most of the owners we do work with happen to be flexible. And my theory on this is that, this is our typical client's going to be someone who's later stage in their career because they're trying to design their succession plan, their exit, their retirement. So that means they've already worked for multiple decades. They've built up, some level of wealth or some nest egg where they don't necessarily feel urgent about getting all the money at once. So maybe they want a partial liquidity event. Like the example Laura just gave, a local ocean. So maybe we can find anywhere from 0 to 50% to be financed by a lender. And whether that lender is a traditional bank, which we do see, or whether that's an alternative lender, like someone who came in Laura's case, that can provide upfront liquidity. And then the rest we can do with a seller note. We also see 100% seller note deals fairly frequently. That's the most flexible way to do it. If you are okay getting paid out over 5, 7, 10, 15 years, depending on how you design it, then great. That's like so easy. You get to negotiate with yourself. You don't have to bring in external financing, and you can still realize fair market value of the company. You just get paid out over time with whatever interest rate you attach. So the equation for us, the question for us is, what are the goals and the needs of the owner or the shareholders? What are the goals and the needs of the company? And then what are our hopes and dreams for the stakeholders, such as the employees? And how do we find a financing plan, or how do we design a financing plan that meets that Venn diagram of good for the owners, good for the company, good for the stakeholders? And so that's the work we do. But yes, it works best if you're a profitable company with a flexible owner.
Laura, what's the mechanism by which the employees get paid under the trust?
We set up an equation that allows for profit sharing when there are profits to share. In our first year, we had profit sharing, and that was pretty exciting. So we have a pool, and in our case, it was $110,000 last year that we allocated for profit sharing. So basically, we looked at what our net income was at the end of the year. We ensured that we kept enough for a prudent reserve. In fact, we should have kept more, but we didn't know that in November. It was going to be a really tough winter. So we're taking that lesson pretty seriously into this next year. So part of this is learning. And we also had to make sure we had enough to do any facility equipment and upgrades and make sure that we, of course, service all of our debt. So after that, we allocated $110,000 for employees. We take all of the hours. Hours are capped at a maximum of 40 hours a week. And every individual is in that pool, and they get a 5% bonus for every year that they've worked up to 10 years. And then that also caps out. So you have a weighted pool that distributes those funds for a very part-time employee that maybe only worked for a few months but left on good terms. We would hunt those employees down even if their payout was $50 or more. But for max tenured employees working max hours, the payout was a little over $3,000. And so that constitutes what we think is meaningful patronage. Every year is different, and there's no guarantee that there will be that large of a pool for profit sharing or that there will be any profit sharing at all. But we do have that formula in place. We have some flexibility about being able to work with that formula over time. The trust just ensures that we have a profit sharing mechanism. It doesn't dictate exactly how it works, but through the experience of other businesses that AOA brought to us, like Organically Grown Company, we thought that was pretty fair. One of the questions I do get often is, do you weight it for performance or for people who are in higher responsibility positions? And the answer is no. That's what their pay band is for, and that's what the compensation plan is for. So if you're in a high responsibility position or you're a high performer, your pay reflects that. But when it comes to profit sharing, it's a bit more evenly distributed, with the exception of a small bump for tenure.
I know it hasn't been that long, but have you seen an impact on hiring and retaining of employees?
It's a little hard for me to answer, Lauren, because I'm not in the operations and day to day. I'm not on the floor anymore. I go in the restaurant and sometimes the hosts just look at me and greet me like I'm another customer. That's how a little out of touch I am. But my gut sense says that we have 80 employees. There's always been a certain number of employees that have treated the company as if they own it. Even before this, that employee that just really wants the company to succeed and feels vested in that. This is probably enhancing that for them. And there are always employees in my kind of work where people just, they come in, they want to clock in, clock out, do a good job, and they don't really think too much about the bonus structure. They're just more in the day-to-day, like what I need to do right now. So it's a little soon to call, but we do have incredible tenure rates compared to the national average. Our tenure is off the charts compared to the national average for restaurants, but we were enjoying that kind of tenure rate even prior to employee ownership, just because we are a values-based business and have always taken a lot of care with employee satisfaction. I think one of the questions that I do get a lot is like, how do you know if you're a good fit for this kind of an ownership model, or how would I prepare our company to be a good fit? And I think what I learned through the process is there are kind of four main things that I think set us up for success in a trust ownership model. One was that we already had a really strong management team in place that allowed me to exit the operations of the business without disrupting the flow of the business. I still stay involved from an overarching fiscal management purview and some brand management things that will be transitioning over the next year or two, but we had strong operations in place. Also, I had been sharing our financial picture with employees for probably, I think, 4 or 5 years prior to the transition. Every year I did a full, and still do, a full Monty presentation where I share with all employees what's the income, the expenses, and the financial health of the organization. So they had some financial literacy going into it, which I think was really useful. The other is the financing part. We did not have debt, and I would imagine it would be, and Peter would know more than I for companies that do have debt, but I had personally signed every loan agreement the company ever had, and I think it would have been hard to turn that debt over to trust ownership. I probably would have had to have kept those notes or paid them off. So having low or no debt service and positive cash flow, because as an outgoing owner, I want to know that the company has enough funds to make the loan payments to me and to the impact investor over time. And then the fourth thing I think is something that a company really has to think about is, do you have a purpose? Is there a legacy, like rationale for your business? Do you have a strong why? Because that's really the focal point to which this all revolves around. Purpose ownership requires purpose. If your business is just processing equipment and not really doing purpose-driven work, it might not have the traction that's needed for this kind of a model. So those four things, I think, were reasons why Local Ocean was really well poised for this.
Peter, do you have anything to add to what makes someone a good candidate for this process?
I mean, like I said, it helps to be a profitable business. A low debt load, I agree, helps. Although we do see companies go through this transition that have, a number of loans on the book or debt on the balance sheet, and they make that transition. And then the specifics of how that happens really varies, and whether or not they had personal guarantees before, whether or not those need to carry forward. But we have seen, for example, banks finance transitions where they will accept the one asset the trust does have, right, is the stock of the company. So most deals, I would say, don't expect a bank to accept the stock of the company as acceptable collateral for a term loan to finance these transitions. But we have seen that happen in certain circumstances. But I think it has less to do with, like, as long as you're profitable and the owner has some flexibility, then it's really more of like a cultural purpose question and what your goals are. So if you're an owner and you've been looking for a succession plan and you've been struggling to find one that's aligned with your values, this may be a good option because it's so flexible. You can sort of design it yourself. You can design your ideal buyer to come and buy your company, that you can exit your business in a way that allows you to not compromise the integrity of this beautiful thing that you've built, but it also allows you to realize a fair value on your life's work. And it's becoming more popular because so many companies who have grown with a purpose, they look at the alternatives. They look at selling to private equity. Okay, I'm worried about my employees or my purpose if I do that. They look at ESOPs and they say, oh, that's administratively burdensome. It's also basically purpose agnostic. And like Laura said, maybe a retirement benefit's not the way I want to incentivize my employees. And they look at co-ops, and co-ops are great for some companies and they're just not a good fit for others. So this is kind of this fourth option that I predict will become much, much more popular over the next decade.
Laura, when you sold the business to the trust, did you include ownership of the building?
No, Lauren, I did not. So I still retain ownership in the building, which actually keeps me vested in the long-term interest of the company far beyond what many owners would really even need to be, because of course I want to retain them. We have 7-year loans with myself and with the impact investor. It's going to be an interesting thing in 5 years as we really think about how that when that debt service is paid, how that additional capital can be activated throughout the company, either just through enhanced pay, distributions, what have you. But purchasing the building has been considered. It's an interesting thing for us to think about. And, it's like, what's the purpose of owning a building when, if you have a beneficial landlord like myself that has a long-term interest in just keeping you there, is there a benefit in owning the building? And I think that's something that we'll think about. It's really changing the nature of ownership for me and my mind from kind of a winner takes all. I've benefited quite a bit from being a business owner. I went out on huge risk. I'm not abashed to say I was $3 million in debt at one point between purchasing stock, purchasing the building, putting in improvements, and, had a lot of skin in the game and had it all on the line. And we've set up this kind of winner takes all approach where, big risk, big reward. Yeah, I've been really benefited by the company, and I'm grateful for that. But I don't think any particular employee is ever going to be able to benefit nearly like I was. Really, what we're talking about is distributing those benefits in very real time to push the edge on living wages, which in the restaurant industry is very difficult to achieve living wage standards for all of your employees. But this is where we can really make a difference, is living wages for all, paid time off for all, excellent benefits for all. Not many restaurants outside of large corporate chains perhaps are really in a position to provide that for employees. So it's changing the kind of the dynamic of risk and reward in the business. And I think that's really exciting.
That all makes sense. And I'm certainly very glad that you're putting it all on the line paid off for you. I am curious about the building ownership from one perspective, which is the trust that owns the restaurant may be immortal, but there's a chance that maybe you are not, which would mean that there's going to be a transition there at some point, which introduces some element of risk for the business going forward, not knowing for sure who might end up owning that building if it's not the trust. Was that a concern for you? And I'm curious then how Peter views that element of the deal.
Yeah, Lauren, I don't know that I have a definitive response for that at this time. But maybe I'll be working with Peter and his associates more as we kind of consider some of the next steps of securing the long-term interests of the trust.
I think it's an astute question, Lauren. It's not unique to Local Ocean either. We work with a lot of businesses who have a piece of real estate that is integral to the company operation, whether it's a manufacturing facility or a kind of a marquee retail location or whatever it is. And so this question gets raised of, and often they're separate businesses, like the real estate's an LLC that's owned by, say, the owners separately from the business. So this question does get raised, what to do with that. And there's no right answer. The right thing to do is raise the question. And so I think, how much of a risk is it to Local Ocean? I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the restaurant is a great tenant, regardless of who owns the building. And I don't think any owner would be eager to boot them out. But that said, the most conservative thing you could do would be to include real assets in the trust or in a sister trust to kind of secure that legacy.
Have I missed anything? Is there anything that you feel compelled to mention?
I would just say from an owner, like just an emotional perspective, I really had to face some of my own fears about what it would mean to sell this company in this way or in any way. And what if they fail was something that I thought a lot. And it wasn't just me. I had employees on our leadership team that would say, Laura, you've built a successful business. Like, what if we can't, keep it going without your leadership? To which I said, well, there's never any guarantees in business. I mean, even under my leadership in the future, we could fail. There's so many ways a business can fail, and just you have to know that. So what if the business fails? If the business fails, then all the assets get dissolved. The debts get paid in as much as they can. If there's anything left over, it goes to a prescribed charity that's written into your trust agreement, and you go find other jobs. But nobody's coming after your house. Nobody is taking you to bankruptcy court. There's a lot of those risks are averted, but there's no guarantees that you're going to succeed. You just got to show up and do the work, and we have to do the best that we can at making this a success.
My thanks to Peter Curler and Laura Anderson, and of course to our sponsor, The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Wait, don't leave yet. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like the 21 Hats owners to address, send it to me by replying to your morning report or by email at lauren@21hats.com. That's LOREN @21hats.com. Do it now before you forget. And don't be afraid to tell Jay what you really think. He can take it. And if you got something out of this conversation, help us reach more business owners. Tell a friend. Subscribe and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to the Morning Report at 21hats.com. This episode was produced by Jess Thuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Okay, now you can leave. Thanks for listening, everyone.